welcome everyone to our August 6th Design Educators Typography Intensive. I want to thank everyone for attending. And I want to thank Google for their sponsorship and my Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography staff. I could not do this without them, obviously. And those who don't know, I'm Gloria Condrup, and I'm the Executive Director of the HMCT. And today I have two of my absolutely favorite people, I have to say, in design and in education, both of them, Stephen Heller and Gail Anderson. Thank you for being here. How to introduce the two of you is very difficult because there's so much, I'll start with Gail. The usual. Gail is a New York-based designer, an educator, a writer, and now you're the chair of undergraduate, I believe, BFA, Advertising and Design Departments, the School of Visual Arts. You're the creative director of Visual Arts Press. You're a partner with Joe Newton at Anderson Newton Design. I mean, recipient of AIGA Lifetime Achievement Awards. You do a lot of lectures. You're just an all-around Gail Anderson. Stephen Heller, you're the co-chair of MFA Design at SVA Masters workshop at SVA Masters, and also the Master's program in Rome. I didn't know about this. You have, let's see now, you have authored over 190 books or co-authored.
Eking up to 200.
Going up to 200, I mean, unbelievable. In addition to at least 200, I think you have another 100 inside of you, if you ask me. But you are the contributing editor for Design Observer. I think you're still doing your print magazine online, I believe.
Yes, Daily Heller.
Daily Heller, right? The Daily Heller, which is wonderful. The two of you together have co-authored numerous books. Your new book, the most recent publication, Type Speaks, and I love it, a lexicon of expressive, emotional, and symbolic typefaces. And as I will tell everyone, and I told Gail and Stephen this morning, it is a candy store for anyone who loves type. Please welcome Stephen and Gail. And I'm going to disappear and be quiet.
So yeah, we want to say hello. Steve, who that?
That be me. After I was thrown out of New York University for never going to class, I ended up at SVA and being thrown out of there for never going to class. But I did manage to get an ID card.
Oh, that's funny.
Which looks like the next.
Yeah. Then I've got the groovier version that Richard Weil designed, that logo. I was also an SVA student. I did graduate, and I've still got my card and the card that followed that was less groovy than this, and had the surly attitude and the little afro then. So good times. It was the media art department back then. It was just media. Things weren't split up yet. And Steve and I have worked on 13, 14 books over the 30 years and counting. So
I think maybe more than 30 years.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
I've been doing it for about 45 years.
Oof, wow. And go for it.
Well, one of the things that I started doing those 45 years ago was collecting. I was with an art director who had a very wonderful library, and she convinced me that one learns best by having the artifacts.
I'm going to go back to that because that's just so cool.
So collecting and documenting artifacts became my entree into design history. Design history, when I was starting to do it, research and write about it, was really limited to a few scholars, Phil Meggs being one of them, and Richard Hollis being another. I found that one of the things that I was most interested in it in the early days was caricature and cartoon, which you'll see comes up in a moment with Gail. But as I started getting more involved in the study of type and type forms, I was less interested in the classical typographic arrangements and more in the sculptural, the outrageous, the eclectic, the ethereal, things that suggested that type was more than just ink on a page that you read without interruption, clearly and precisely. That type was an expressive art using sculptural forms, and that many designers, as well as artists, illustrators, and other media involved people used letter forms in unique ways. Fortunato de Pero, who did the bolted book here, was experimenting not only with type and lettering, but with the form of the book. And in addition to that, he created architectural events that were made from letter forms. So I became very much interested in all of those designers, artists, and craftspeople that were working in this area. I also must credit Louise Feely, my wife, for taking me out of the realm of cartoon and caricature, which I did a lot of scholarly work on, and brought me into the typographic world. And I've been there ever since. And still find many ways of looking at the world through typography. It's a very wide angle lens. What about you, Gaily?
Oh, for me, I have a fraction of the collection you have, but I've got stuff, and we share that ability to hoard lots and lots of stuff, and now trying to figure out what to do with the stuff. Everything from, books about matchbook art, picking that up at Brimfield at the flea market years ago, to books. I picked this up at Letterform Archive last time I was in San Francisco, I think. And just, is it here at home with me? Is it at work? Is it at school? It's just stuff, just more stuff. And now figuring, do I scan the stuff? And what do I do with these books? And do I use this for teaching? And but you hit that age where you're wondering what to do with the stuff. But I love it. And I love finding something at a flea market still, or in a store. It's less fun finding it online, but it's still fun. And then sharing it. And for me, it's the stuff I grew up with as well. The albums that my parents had, seeing that when I was a kid, and wondering who did it, how I get to do it too. Who gets jobs like that? How do you get it? Look at that lettering. Look at the two people in love there. Yeah. And then I was in Atlanta about a decade ago to do a talk for Type Directors Club, and saw this woman's work, June Corley from Alabama, and she was making these type sculptures. And it's like, oh my goodness, you know, so then falling in love with all this stuff that I now want to have in my home, and buying it right on the spot and having it shipped to me, and then meeting her later and becoming friends. And Steve wrote a piece about her in a Daily Heller years back, and she's been in some of our books. And just, I love that sort of connection of the people, the work, the books, the objects, that it all loops together. And back again at Letterform Archive, and finding this, that I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about it. I don't know if you do, Steve, but I just thought it was so cool, this book. And it's just like, let me take pictures. Maybe I can't own it because it's super expensive, but I can take pictures of it, and hopefully be inspired and inspire others. If you can visit the Letterform Archive, do it, do it, do it. And now, you know, the way we all do some of our little kind of shopping for inspiration, and certainly that students do, is just poking around online. And so I sort of hoard that too, to keep these images and show them in class and get students to try to keep track of type, you know. And we've done so many projects together. I've known Steve for my whole adult life, and it's been such a joy and such an amazing learning experience, and so much work, and even more stuff because of this. Steve, do you want to give the sequence of the books, or would you like me to?
Well, I can give the historiography. Gail had called me at one point and asked if she could work on a project with me. And when anybody ever volunteers their services, particularly when money isn't mentioned, I just jump at it. And I knew Gail's work very well, was very much a fan of it. So I thought this would be a fun collaboration. So the first book I had available to work on together was on graphic wit, humor in design, which of course is a key aspect of what we do. We entertain as designers.
And Steve, I mean, how hard were these books back then, of faxing people and calling people and getting work FedEx to us and getting that shot? And it was so complicated to do this stuff back then.
It was very
back then in the 90s.
Very time consuming. And also intellectual property rights were not as big an issue as they are today. Getting releases and getting permissions from all levels of so-called ownership.
And then you spun that one out into this one years later, right?
Yeah, graphic wit went out of print. And I went further into design humor. James Victoria did that cover. Stephen Granaccia did the graphic wit cover.
Yeah.
And then, as I was saying earlier, I've been involved in political art and design for a considerable amount of time. Gail has been commissioning illustration for a long time since she worked at the Boston Globe. And I had this idea to do a book on contemporary caricature. I had already done a book on cartooning of the late 20th century. This is a Philip Burke painting as the cover. And it was the graphic wit was a book where we kind of set our sights on certain themes. But this was the first book where I said to Gail, just go get me stuff. Go find what you like. We'll talk about what we both think is important, but we'll do two sections. One section would be the heroes of caricature, and the other would be the newcomers or the newbies who are not so new anymore.
Yeah, really.
And we created Savage Mirror.
And I was so steeped in that because I was commissioning at Rolling Stone. So this was a no-brainer and was so much fun to work on, I remember. And Teresa Fernandez designed it.
Right.
Right? Yeah. And what else?
So
Alex Isley did this one.
Alex Isley did this. Gail could have, at that point, been designing the books, but there was just so much work involved in making editorial selections and decisions that it was better to find somebody who would interpret what we did. And that's what book design for us has been, where we collect material, organize it, document it, write about it, show it, and let somebody else interpret how it's to be seen.
And it was just so much work up front that I remember I was just out of steam by the time it came to designing the books. It was like, I don't have any bandwidth left for this because it was such a process to do the work and to reach out to people and all those phone calls and faxes and, you know, again, getting stuff shot and getting it back to them and all that was a lot of work. But I have fond memories of this book and still like it a lot. This one less so because the title changed at the last minute. And so to me, the content of the book, the title didn't reflect that properly. But again, it was still a fun experience. And I was at Spot then, and the designers I worked with were really into working on this. So the content of the book was good.
The book itself is actually one of my favorites. It's a little book, thin, small in scale. Gail went through 30 or 40 covers to get to this one. So it was painful in that respect. And it was also very much about the craft of Photoshop in its early days.
Its early days, yeah.
And showing how Photoshop and photomontage and photo collage, the digital and the analog work together. So it was a lot of work to present technical material that many designers would just as soon find in a classroom rather than a book. But it's really an art book, and it deserves to be resurrected and seen as such. The publisher was not very good at getting this one around.
Yeah, wah wah. But then there were these, which were really fun. These were a wonderful experience.
Yeah, what I realized is that the obvious, designers love type. It's the lingua franca of our profession. It's the art, it's the candy, as Gloria said. It is the means we communicate in the most primal and exorbitant ways. And so Thames and Hudson and I were doing a few books together. We did one with Mirko Ilic called Handwritten. And it was a book that I had proposed because I saw a lot of handwriting coming back into the type sphere. And Thames and Hudson is a great publisher, but they said, we don't think it's going to sell. And a year later, I got a call from the editor saying, it's time to, it'll sell. I said, you know, I told you that a year ago, that people were interested in this. So we did Handwritten. And then I turned to Gail, who was already doing handwritten or custom lettering on many of her projects in the manner of the French and German poster artists. And we came up with a series that showed first new vintage. There's always been that kind of postmodern sensibility in graphic design and particularly type. And new ornamental seemed to flow perfectly out of new vintage. And then New Modernist was just a logical way of dealing with an aspect of design history that was coming back in spades. You know, modernism, mid-century modernism was making a revival, as if the word modern can be revived.
Hmm.
And what Gail and I would do in these contexts are we'd sit around and talk about different categories and hope we could fill those categories. It was kind of putting the cart before the horse,
Mm-hmm.
because the work that we found, and particularly Gail found, determined what our categories were. Every book has to have categories,
Mm-hmm.
has to have buckets. And Gail did so much in terms of digging and ferreting out this material. Did you have any favorites?
I remember on these books, Christine, Mia, everybody who helped kept getting pregnant. Christine was like, I'd like to have a baby. Boom, pregnant during New Vintage. Boom, pregnant again during New Ornamental. Mia helping out.
My
I'm having
fault.
a baby too. Yeah, just like there's so many babies with these books. And I think in the intros we wrote it each time, like there's another baby. And I loved working on New Vintage the most, probably. And I remember doing the covers for these and then having to do the foreign covers that had much longer titles and having to redo the types. Like, oh no. But this, I like this series a lot. This is good times, good memories. And then Typographic Universe, and then Type Tells Tales, which had another cover. There was the British cover and the American cover. Yeah, these are like, these sort of become these little like your family in some weird way, because they
Well,
all have stories attached to them.
there's certainly books that kind of represent the way we're thinking and feeling at the time. You'll see more of Typographic Universe in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see more about Type Tells Tales in relation to Type
Mm-hmm.
Speaks as well.
Sorry.
But
Force the phone from you. Sorry.
These were extraordinary opportunities to meet designers and artists who were doing things that we wouldn't necessarily see or come across in our everyday work as educators or art directors.
Yeah. I remember Type Tells Tales. I had a hard time wrapping my head around what you wanted to do with that book. I remember that. It's like, okay, so this, well, I mean, we'll see some examples, but like Typographic Universe was like, yep, I know where we're going. Yep, no problem. And then Type Tells, I was like, wait, what is this? What you're talking about? Is this?
Yeah, and that's the great thing that Gail and I have together. We can read each other's minds in many ways. We can also see what's going on in our minds and find something else.
Yeah.
Which either improves or expands the project. So Gail kept asking me questions about Type Tells Tales, and I would say, it's so obvious.
Yeah, like, I don't know what you're talking about, Steve.
Then she'd come up with material that just fit like a glove. And again, it just comes from this feeling that there's more to type than what's on the page. There's type is something that used to be seen but not heard about. But type really has sound to it and emotion, and that comes through in what we've been trying to do. I think of it as kind of like a documentary film. Gail at one point was teaching in the MFA design program typographic videos, which I've always
Oh my
loved.
goodness.
Still
Yeah.
love. And one of the students in her class took the book that I did with Louise Feely called Typology, and he made an animation out of the entire book. So it was like the old classical gas record, a history of music in 2 minutes. And this kid gave us a history of type in 60 seconds. And it was just so splendorific.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And then there's this series, 4 little books that people have really liked, that are not quite pocket sized, but definitely throw it in your backpack and learn something.
Yeah, these books, Lawrence King Publishers, I had done a few books for on art direction and 100 ideas that changed graphic design, which I did with Veronique Vienne, as was the art direction book, What is Art Direction, I did with Veronique. I love working collaboratively with other people, particularly Gail and Veronique and Lita Tellerico and Louise Feely and Seymour Quast and Mirko Ilic. And these books started as an editor calling and saying, we'd like to do an idea series, or not even a series. We'd like to do what makes a good designer. And I said, let's do an idea series where what makes a good graphic designer, what makes a good typographic designer, what makes a good illustrator, and what makes a good branding or logo identity designer. And I told that to Gail in 100 words or less. And from that point on, we came up with maybe for each book 100 ideas that would have impact on designers if they followed the inspiration of those ideas. We would constantly be sending ideas back and forth between us and our editor, Joe Lightfoot. And she would say, no, that's not an idea, that's a concept. And it got to be very Talmudic. But we ended up with 50 ideas in each one of these books that are some in the words of the creators and some interpretations of what the creators were doing.
In these, I remember we also want to go less obvious and not just the greatest hits that everybody knows from each of these categories. And so we were trying to get some really contemporary stuff in there that was solid and classic in its own way, and not just the stuff that, yeah, I know that piece already. I know that. That's obviously a great logo. That's obviously an amazing illustration. So these were, yeah, this was a nice little series.
Yeah, there was a book that came out years ago called The Dictionary of Visual Ideas by Peter Davenport. And that to me was the kind of touchstone book for books like the Idea Book series and 100 Ideas. He would show an image and give it a dictionary definition. So it kind of created a lexicon of visual practice, an illustrated encyclopedia, so to speak. And that's what this was. This collection of material has that goal and impact.
Yeah. And there's this guy, which is just out in June. Sort of groovy, hipstery stuff. Started out not with that intention, but there was so much wonderful stuff out there. So much really playful, imaginative type out in the world right now that this has sort of hit at a moment to celebrate that. the Lexicon of Expressive, Emotional, and Symbolic Typefaces. And it's this little chunky book that I have ended up really loving, that was postponed for a while because of the pandemic, and is finally out. So so that's been really exciting.
Yeah, the proposal for this book, and for so many books, begin one way and end up another way.
Mhm.
And you have to hope that the publisher and or the editor is liberal enough and open enough to see that book ideas evolve, that they don't always turn out the way you've planned them to turn out. Whenever I'm asked for an outline for something, I can do an outline in 20 minutes. It takes 20 minutes because I make a lot of typos, but it rarely turns out the same way. We rarely use the outline as a blueprint, but basically a very loose guide. So this book, I had a very specific idea in mind, which was show lots of specimen sheets of interesting type and put them in certain categories that were simple categories like hate and love and desperation and fear. And when I turned it over to Gail, those categories kind of mushed together. And it was very difficult in terms of, are we getting the right material to fulfill the obligation of the book? And at a certain point in my mind, I just said, okay, let Gail find whatever, and then we'll figure it out. I can always figure out something to write because everything tells a story. Type speaks, but you can also speak about type in ways that are not just technical or aesthetic, but philosophical, sociological, and the like. So what Gail ended up doing with the aid of Joe Newton was create a book that was something of a surprise for me. And I've told Gail this many times, that getting her layouts after we've worked in the abstract for so long, getting her layouts is like Christmas for me.
Yeah.
It's like opening up the PDF is like opening a Christmas gift, because I'm not really sure what I'm getting. I know generally what's going to happen. And rarely do I find myself disappointed, like I got a pair of slippers instead of
Another belt.
another belt, right?
Yeah, this was a tough one for me because I changed jobs in the middle of it, and then there was the pandemic. It's just like, oh my goodness, this poor little book. But in the end, seeing it, when you get it in the mail, you're like, well, that was fun. You forget all the other stuff that went along with it. It's like, oh, this is so wonderful.
Yeah, I can't tell you the high that comes with getting the first copy.
Yep.
I've never done psychotropic drugs, and I've never done uppers and downers or poppers or anything like that. So I can only imagine that this is a similar experience.
Yep.
That first hit when you open the box and the scratch paper comes off, or the shrink wrap is torn off.
Yep.
Because the highs need to come so quickly now after all these years. I often leave the book, and I did that with Type Speaks, on a table for 3 days before I opened it. I just wanted to make sure Gail had her copy. And we didn't say anything about it because I don't think either of us really opened it.
Yeah. And with the books, I'd open it and see the mistakes first. And you're like, oh, I can't believe I missed that. But with this one, it's just like, oh, this is just such a little bundle of joy. This one's just so much fun. So it was a nice little pandemic gift to get the box of books in the mail on this one for sure. So, and I'm going to give it to my class. So a lot of students will get it.
It was like having the birth of my son. Bundle of
Oh.
joy was sure.
Oh,
And nobody's complained. That's the other thing
nobody's
that happens.
complained. Yes, Steve.
Maybe it's because of the pandemic that
Yeah, probably.
people have other things to complain about. But you know, when you do a book and you find out you've made a mistake,
Oh,
whether it's a mistake of credit or a
uh-huh.
mistake in terms of chronology or just the scholarship itself.
Oh no, or you left somebody's piece out. That's where I get hit is I thought you were going to use this. Oh, I forgot. Or it got cut.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Oh.
Yeah, my worst experience, and it was a bittersweet experience actually, was after one of my books came out, somebody, a know-it-all, sent me 2 pages of corrections. And I was happy to have the corrections, but the fact is I didn't think the book would go into a second printing anyway, so what the hell was I going to do with the corrections? I
Yeah,
have them
really.
in a file that says Heller screwed up.
Yeah. Oh, so we're just going to walk you through, not a lot to say, but just let you take a look at some stuff. A little bit from the typographic universe of just sort of celebrating the vernacular of this was just so much fun to ask people from around the world for things that look like letters, you know, just where we were finding type in nature and
It's a total,
everything was real, you know,
and
there was no
it's everything is
Photoshop.
real, and it was a total game that you play.
Mhm.
It actually didn't do well.
Nope.
It should have. I mean, it is indeed more of a concept art book than it is a typography book. We did show some ghost signs.
Yeah, that guy's got a book coming up that was on Kickstarter, the ghost sign guy.
Yeah.
I loved all this stuff.
And most of it was these kinds of applications that you see every day. You'll walk down the street and see that dog lying on his back and say, Jesus, that's an M.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Or,
And, uh,
you know,
or
it's,
this, yeah, with the carpet, you know, this actually forms an alphabet.
yeah, and this was done by a young student at the College of Creative Studies in Detroit, where I received an honorary doctorate, which is why I tell my students to call me doctor,
Yeah.
which gets embarrassing since I'm not. But he did this, and it just floored me that he himself was an Arab-born student from Saudi, I believe, and he's taking these things and making a Latin alphabet out of it.
And I mean, there were just crazy things like this that, so it's a mix of found and created and somebody collected their toenails. This was
Full
really
alphabet
toenails.
too.
Full alphabet of toenails. Yep. And this, a woman sent me a perfectly formed L that she found in the shower. And you've got to use this. And it's like, I was sort of like amazed and repulsed and everything at the same time. It turned out to be this lady who sent me that L. And of course it was perfectly formed. Louise Feely would of course have a perfect hair L in the shower. So there you go.
And I have to say, we kept it there for months.
Until we moved. Yeah. No, that was like Louise, like, this is so funny. I'm going to use it. She's like, you are? It's like, yes, of course we're going to use this. So only Louise would have a perfect L. So, you know, and then there's the other books of more conventional stuff for us. Type Tells Tales. This was the one that I said I was having a hard time wrapping my head around, but once it happened, it's like, okay, this makes sense now. And this was a big book, as I recall. It was a nice oversized book.
Well, what was great about it is that we didn't know what the size was going to be. Gail didn't.
No, I guess they were done with me designing it after the other one flopped. So
we
they
had
did it themselves.
No idea that it was going to be the size of a tabloid newspaper. Just about. and it was the perfect size. Publishers often tell you when they're going to do this kind of thing, but I think my editor might have thought he had told me and didn't. But the book itself was based on the idea that type is content, that words have meaning and have sights and sounds and nuances and intricacies, but showing those in physical form adds to the content, adds to the meaning, adds to the emotion. And so actually, Gail, go back to that one. You might want to explain.
Oh, oh my goodness, this is cut paper. There are words in there when you look closely. There were a bunch of projects like this in the book that people are pretty intense, you know, and when it comes to type, they get super intense. So some of these projects are, oh my goodness, cutting this out of paper.
And this book actually began years ago. I don't even think I told Gail this, but when I was editor of the AIGA Journal, I did a piece on psychotic lettering. People who would do infinitesimal lettering on what would become a broadsheet that they'd paste on a mailbox or on a poster hoarding. And it was a whole manifesto or a biography or a plea for help. And, you know, we would just look at it and say, oh, another sick person on the street. Well, sick psychotic type has become a trend, has become a fad, but also has become something that's really part of the vocabulary and an art form. So somebody like Warren Lira, who was a pioneer in this overlapping type, actually came to it from a dramatic perspective. What he was doing, which was somewhat influenced by the typographer Massin, who did the bald
Soprano.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was going to say the bald alto. He uses type as sound and dialogue. So instead of having photographs of the actors, he creates typographic formats using different typefaces, layering those typefaces. And if you have the patience to read, you get the layers of the story coming through. This was done also in a more mass market book with The Lightness of Being, Jonathan Safran Foer's book, who also plays around typographically, as did Alice in Wonderland. That was one of the first times typographic play was used in a novel. So this is a play, and as you read it, it becomes more of a chaotic scenario.
I love this. I was able to find a copy of this one for myself, but I was never able to get French fries. Because now gone were the days of getting the actual books in the mail to scan. You just got scans. But I love French fries. Yeah. And, you know, then there's the series we showed before, New Ornamental, New Vintage, New Modern, Modernist, and see the French cover. Had to figure out how to squeeze all that in there. Yikes.
Yeah, it's interesting what also gets bought for foreign editions. Some of the books just go out as English editions to foreign markets, and some of the books have to be translated. And I don't know what really determines that or not. I do know, for example, that hand lettering or handwritten was done in a number of foreign editions. with covers that were better than our original cover.
And the little books, the little Lawrence King books had a bunch of different editions.
They had about
Especially
10 editions.
Yeah, especially the first two, as I recall.
Yeah, Russian and Chinese among them.
Yeah. Yep. One that was edited a bit, I remember.
Well, the Chinese
The
publishers
Chinese one, yeah.
tend to censor if they don't feel that the content is right. And of course, we'll never know except when they zap out or pixelate images.
So,
And what about these, Gail, these sketches?
These were in New Ornamental, and Paula gave us these little notebooks to scan that she'd just been making type. It's like, okay, this is fantastic. And so all of these books, this is from New Modernist, Helen Yentis, love these Camus books. Muka was before from New Ornamental. This is just, it's just candy for me to have access to all of this, and I end up stuffing too much of it into each book because I want to show so much and should probably blow it out and do bigger images on pages. But there's so much good stuff that we collect, and people are so generous, and yeah, it's.
Well, this is also the age of typography, more so than any other period. The digital certainly triggered it, breaking from the standards of classical type, encouraged it and propagated it. I had done a couple of books with Lita Tellerico of designers' sketchbooks, including 2 on typography, one typographer sketchbooks, and the other was, now I can't remember the name of the book, but they were both about the craziness you go through in making letters and deciding what's going to be legible, what's going to be readable, what's going to be emotive, what's going to be visceral.
And this little guy, doing research, I found this, a friend gave me this, Francine gave me this book actually, and looking at old and thinking, okay, we'll start with old and then we'll get to new. And so much of the old stuff was so cool, and so much of the new stuff looked like the old stuff and was spinning off stuff that I found in this book in particular. I was sorry I had to give the book back. But Steve is the master of coming up with categories and pithy names for the categories, and we divided up all the goodies again and tried to find places for them to live in this little book, and made this one a real little piece of design, which was mostly Joe's doing of getting as much in as possible and having as much fun as possible.
And again, for me, it was like Christmas because I didn't know that this was going to happen. One of my ambitions in life was to become a headline writer for the New York Post. Those guys, headline writers anywhere have to be really good, but particularly the Post. So I always tend to go sensational when I'm writing subheads or category heads.
Yes, you'd be great for the Post.
And in fact, we were going to have the headlines on these pages, but it turned out there was just too much layering of hierarchical type.
So we created a lot of specimens from typefaces, but then we also included some projects made with the typefaces. So, and some little case studies and little goofy stuff here and there. It's just, this was really fun. And people gave us work that made me want to buy the typefaces for myself and start using them. And I know it's sort of a moment, it's all very contemporary, but what the heck, this was just so much fun. And I think that people will get a kick out of it. And just doing silly stuff like this to take advantage of the typefaces and show people how cool they are to use. So.
And there's also a kind of remaking of history. I have boxes upon boxes of type specimens from the 20s and 30s. And they were done very much like pieces of sheet music. But they were also done like catalogs for commercial products, all to show a type director at an advertising agency or a designer at a design shop how different typefaces could fit their particular needs and reach their particular audience. So what Gail and Joe did with these layouts is create our interpretation of that kind of specimen sheet sensibility.
Yeah, so we were writing silly copy to go with them. And again, these just sort of designed themselves because the type was just so wonderful, and making up silly categories to put stuff in. So yeah, I hope people get a kick out of this.
It's also the kind of book that you can, if you have trouble sleeping, first of all, I always tell people if they have trouble sleeping, read my books. But this one just kind of puts you into a mood. It takes you out of the daily grind. It gives you something else to contemplate. It is at once exciting if you look at it during the day, and if you look at it at night, it's soothing.
Dan Radigan and those type sleeves of his. I would never think to get a tattoo, but if I did, that number 2 is just so beautiful.
Yeah, so type also speaks through the words of some of the type directors, type creators. Danny Plavin is quoted in there, and Dan, his fixation with type is well documented.
Yeah, and Zapong and his silliness on Instagram. And then you want to talk about this? Because this was
well, this
so
is
cool.
I work with Seymour Quast a lot. In fact, after this is over, I have to go over and do a shoot for his 90th birthday, which comes up in 2 weeks or less. And I was looking through an old bookstore, and I came across this book that he did. Seymour has done alphabets that have become quite famous, like Art, Tone, and Bestial Bold. But he did a whole children's book on alphabets, and I just loved it. It was just so perfectly done to teach a child what the alphabet is, while at the same time teaching an adult what it means to be a typeface. You know, a typeface has a life. It's not just an object that you put on a piece of paper. It has feelings of its own. And this book tends to show those in an anthropomorphic sort of way.
It's great that we get to include people we love in these books too. That makes them extra special. And speaking of people we love, there's this guy who spoke at my class last year and who is doing an event for us at SVA in the fall. You know him, you love him. It's young Nick Heller, New York Nico. You want to say something about him?
Do I know him? You know, this gets a little maudlin, but to have a son who turned out like him is just, I don't know what I did that was good in life to deserve it. And he has made use of his talents to help people during this pandemic, help small businesses survive using his Instagram account to such an extent that he's gotten a lot of press, but he also recently was awarded a presidential medal from Joe Biden for lifetime achievement at age 32.
Yeah.
For helping his locality survive the crisis.
It's just the coolest, So,
And he looks like me.
Well, yes, he does very much. You'll see in a sec. At SVA, we do an all staff meeting at the beginning of the school year, and we give a gift to the staff. And one year I decided let's make a calendar and have people submit work, and we'll do as everyday SVA. So it was 365 pages of staff contributions. And I asked Steve for one, and he sent a picture that I was like, holy cow. It's Nick and Paul Rand. Nick being held by Paul Rand. And people in the office were like, wait a minute, is that really Paul Rand? Yes, that is Nick being held by, like, what? That's so crazy. Steve, what's up with this?
Well, Paul was a good friend, and I wrote Paul's professional biography that's still in print. One thing about having artist friends, designer friends, is that they create wonderful things. And Paul was a friend who happened to invite us to his home and said, bring the kid along. And Nick got to meet the great Rand. He also got to meet, among many others, Leo Leone, who in those days was doing his book of mice. I forget the name of them now. And he came to our house and he put Nick on his knee, and then he took out an envelope, and in the envelope were all these little pieces that had stickum on it. And he put these pieces together, and it was the mouse that he would use in his children's books.
Wow. Okay. That's an amazing story. So look at Nick closely there, and then look at Steve, and you will see the same person. Oh my goodness. And then you'll see me there with my sister and my dad in the Bronx.
We all look alike.
Yeah. Yep. And that's it. So thank you so much.
And we're happy to answer any very personal, intimate questions.
There you go.
You're very funny. I don't have personal questions. That's kind of very interesting. Thank you both. I mean, how can I say this? I think you can answer this question. It's just opulent. Everything that you both have done is just so incredibly thick and detailed, and it's wonderful. I have to say, and Gail, do you design all of the books that you two have co-authored? You and Joe Newton? No, you don't. Not necessarily.
No, because as I said before, early on, it was so much work to do the research and then get everything shot that by that time, I just didn't have any space in my head to think about designing. And the Rolling Stone days for me were so intensely busy that I didn't have any room in my life to do that. And I hated that I couldn't, but I was also really excited every time I saw it. Louise designed Graphic Wit, and then Teresa Fernandez did Savage Mirror. And then when Alex Isley did Type Play, I was like, well, this is exactly what it should be. And they got to have a hand in the final edit of like, okay, let's cut this down one more time. And they just did amazing jobs. And then I started doing it after that, once everything was digital and it was easier to take it on. So yeah. And then Joe was jumping in on New Modernists and certainly on Type Speaks. So
yeah. So, and the other question, and it comes from one of our attendees, Puya, you can see in the Q&A, it's about hybrid publications. Have you ever, this is an interesting area, entertained, whether something should be done in print-based book design, or should it exist in both worlds as a print-based and then as a digital book?
Well, we have the
Are you-
opportunity to do anything we want these days, as long as the funding is there for it. All our books could have easily been done as digital. As I said, Gail's class did these amazing animations, almost every last one of them. And I did an article once on them and had to just show the individual panels. And it worked as a storyboard, but you lost the
animation.
Yeah. So, the whole idea of doing digital books was you'd have both forms. You'd have it as a multimedia experiential event. And there's only one book I did that was ever only digital. And it was awkward in the sense that it was just essays.
Yeah.
You can get it online, but basically it's just text. So there was really no exploitation of the potential of digital publishing. It's just they didn't want to spend money printing it.
Someone asked a question about the connection between typography and book design. And Stephen, remember, I'll help answer that question, and it's on our YouTube. I did a talk about what I would consider two very interesting women book designers, Louise Feely, of course, and Lorraine Wild, I think, who are both two incredible typographers as well as book designers. And they approach it from two very different perspectives and narratives. So I think, yes, there's definitely a connection. Typography, you might say, is the spine of book design. You can't have a printed book without understanding, use of typography. I don't know if you wanted to.
Well, I remember when I designed, I was 18 or 19, and I was art director briefly for Grove Press in its dying days. Some of our books bring on pregnancies. I bring on dying days of.
Oh, no.
And I had to cast the book out, even though there were going to be images within. It was a small paperback, and I think I did a few of them, but this one that I'm thinking of was for Last Tango in Paris. It was the script. And I had to cast the book out, and I didn't know what casting a book out was. It wasn't meant to be a visual experience. It was meant to be type, which meant that it was supposed to be somewhat invisible, or the crystal goblet. And I think there are different aspects of book design and type. Going to the classical, to the intermediary where it's visual and text, to going to where text just takes over a book like French fries.
Right, experimental, concrete poetry, We have time for one more answer from each of you, and I think we should make this a personal answer. Someone asked, what age did you start loving typography and why?
My parents had a Bible that I thought was really cool. It had a big drop cap. I was like, well, what's that big letter? And then I had games, Candyland and Chutes and Ladders and all those games that just, and the books, I still have some of the books from when I was a kid. It just, and then the magazines, Spec and 16 and Tiger Beat and all that. It's like, who does that? How do you get a job doing that? So straight through from early childhood. So didn't know what it was, but that's
And-
what I wanted to do.
And Stephen, you must have been born with, holding a letter in your hand or something.
No, actually, the irony is I didn't become type savvy until
Right.
Louise and I came together.
That's
which
right.
is 37
That's
to
right.
38 years. To me,
That's
type
right.
was just that thing I had to use to put content on the page. And in
Right.
fact, the first
That's right.
typography I ever did was at an underground paper where we took IBM MTST output, which is just, off of a ball.
Right.
And
Right.
we'd send it to the printer and ask for a 3,000% blow up of an 8-point face. And that's what I'd use as headlines. I'd get galleys back, I'd cut them up, paste them up. And
Right.
so for me, type was, a necessary evil. And then when I saw how beautifully expressive it was, I mean, today, even my friends who are classicists, like Jerry Kelly, he and I will always kind of argue over somebody like, oh man, Herman Zapp, who he's,
Yeah.
and I'd say, I can't stand Herman Zapp, and we'd get into an argument. But
well, we should
things
end maybe
change.
on, things change. We should end on that note. I want to thank you both again.
Thank
I'm
you.
just such an admirer of those of us who can indulge. This has been such an indulgement for me and for everyone else here. I really do appreciate your time and all of the work that you've done in terms of design and typography and archiving everything that we produce today. That's how I look at your books. Your books are really archival in terms of making sure that what is produced is never lost. So thank you everyone for attending. And Stephen and Gail, have a great weekend. Enjoy
too.
yourselves.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
It was
Bye.
fun.
Thank you.